Looking to bring the charm of the Shire to your tabletop? Today we're crafting Hobbit Holes that will transport your games straight to the Middle-earth. Using just foam, some basic tools and a little creativity, you can create these cozy homes perfect for D&D, wargames or display. They are easy, affordable and bustling with character. So let's dive into the green lands of the Shire and prepare for your next tabletop adventure. Hey crafters, welcome back to HANDCRAFTED. Today we're stepping into Middle-earth to create a charming Hobbit Hole inspired by the Lord of the Rings. This project is extra special because I made it with my partner, turning into a fun collaboration. Originally, the idea came from an amazing video from Seb Makes Stuff. Yeah, this guy makes a lot of cool stuff that I also want to make once I see it. Go check it out, his amazing channel. This project also brought back memories from Battles in the Middle-earth collection, which first got me hooked on this hobby. Specifically, issue 62. They teach how to create a Hobbit Hole, but this time we will freestyle it. So grab your tools and let's craft a little piece of the Shire together. The first thing I did was sketch out how I wanted the little house to look. With a clear idea in my mind, I started by cutting the facade from a foam piece. Start by cutting this piece. It should measure between 0.5 and 2 cm thick, depending on how wide you want the roof to be later. Using the freshly cut facade, draw the base mount. This should extend a couple of centimeters beyond the sides of the facade and you can make it as deep as you want. Keep in mind this drawing represents the ground plan. Cut the base using a proxon or alternatively a kitchen knife, utility knife or whatever cutting tool you have available. Now cut another piece identical to the first but slightly larger. If you have access to a foam board thicker than mine, you can skip this step. Since I only have 4 cm foam, I will need to glue 2 pieces together. Once cut, apply PVA glue and join the pieces, ensuring the straight edge is well aligned. Place the facade on top and mark its outline to know where to position it later. Also, draw a line about half a centimeter wider than the facade outline to leave room for the roof and avoid overcutting. To keep the pieces from shifting, use a couple of toothpicks inserted near the straight edge. Make sure that they are centered and not too close to the edges, as they might get in the way during the next cutting step. Great, now it's time for some freehand cutting, either with a hot wire cutter or a knife. Carefully shape the base without cutting beyond the lines you drew earlier. Take your time, and if you're using a proxon like me, finish the finer details with an X-Acto knife. Next, insert several toothpicks to further secure the structure. I used cutting pliers to trim the tips, but another option is to insert them diagonally. Go with whichever method you prefer. To mark the door, I used an MDF piece I had lying around. You can use a lid, a base, or a compass for this. Press firmly to create a slight indentation in the foam. Next, with a knife and a metal roller, make vertical cuts. Widen these cuts with a ballpoint pen to give them depth. Finally, use an aluminum bristle brush to add a wood grain texture. We will create the door frame using a thin piece of foam or peeled foam core. I drew irregular stones with a pen, but you could simulate wood, bricks or any material you prefer. I cut the frame with a hot wire cutter, setting the temperature to nearly the lowest setting. This is important because this is a delicate task, and thin sheets can melt very easily, so work carefully. Slowly trace the lines you drew, cutting out the outer circle first, then do the same for the inner part. Apply a little PVA glue and carefully attach the frame to the door. Now we're going to add beams. While the frame sets, cut a thin foam strip and texture it with a brush. You could also use balsa wood for this, but foam is cheaper and easy to cut with a knife. Glue these small beams protruding from the facade. Don't worry about trimming them for now, let the glue dry first. Using a meter box, cut a couple of extra beams at a 45-degree angle. glue these angled beams into their proper positions to complete the structure. We are making great progress, so let's continue. I want to add a bit of detail to the door, a doorknob and some hinges. Let's see what I have in my bits and scraps box. These doorknobs are really cool, but they don't match the theme at all, so let's keep looking. As you can see, I have a lot of stuff stored just in case I need it for a build. Great, this piece is perfect for hinges. I will just need to cut it in half. I also found this bit, which will work perfectly as a doorknob. For adding the doorknob, place the bit where you want the doorknob to go and press down to create a slight indentation. I decide to carve a little more with the modeling blade to accommodate the doorknob into the foam. Next, add a glue drop and carefully attach the bit, pressing gently to secure it in place. For the hinges, I cut the selected piece in half using cutting pliers. Then, sand it a bit to ensure there were no sharp edges. Repeat the same process as with the doorknob. Press the piece where you want the hinge to go to create an indentation. Remove the piece, add glue and attach it. Since the door is circular, press the hinges slightly towards the frame so they sink in a bit and look natural. All done, these details add a lot of character to the door. Alright, let's make a chimney. I think this will be the first one I've ever made on the channel, because every time I build houses I end up forgetting to include one. For example, in this video, one of my earliest, I built 7 houses and not a single one had a chimney. Start by cutting an XPS foam piece. Next, make horizontal cuts around the piece using a knife. Follow this up with vertical cuts, alternating the placement on each row. It's important to alternate the cuts this way to keep the result looking realistic. Finally, widen the grooves using a ballpoint pen, and texture the surface with a foil ball. Ok, now draw the opening of the chimney. To make the hole, I used a wood burning tool, the same one I showed you in the Modular Caves video. By the way, here is the link to that video if you haven't seen it yet. Don't forget to mark the bricks at the top after making the hole. Mark the spot where you will place the chimney and cut an opening using the wood burning tool. Remember to work in a well-ventilated space and wear a protective mask. Finally, attach the chimney using either PVA glue or hot glue, whichever you prefer. To make the bond even stronger, insert a toothpick through the center of the chimney into the base. If it sticks out, use pliers to trim the excess. Finish by filling any gaps with extra glue or filler. And that's it, your chimney is ready. Before continuing, I made sure to trim the mount right along the line. This way, it will fit better with the roof, and it's much easier to do this now than after attaching the facade. So now that the glue has dried completely, trim the beam sticking out using a knife. Spread PVA glue on the back of the facade and attach it to the mount, aligning it with the lines we drew earlier. I also use filler to add texture to the walls. This is just the typical putty sold for patching wall holes. I bought the cheapest one I could find at the dollar store. While waiting for that to dry, I cut an XPS foam strip and texture it using an aluminium bristle brush. I also drew a wood-like pattern using a ballpoint pen. Then went over it again lightly with the metal brush to refine the texture. When it came time to place the roof, I attached the first piece using PVA glue and pins. It worked, but for the other 2 houses I was working on at the same time, I switched to using hot glue, which turned out to be much easier. Once everything is securely dry and attached, don't forget to trim any overhanging roof parts. For one of these houses, I decided to add some steps. I used leftover foam scraps from other projects for this. With patience, I cut out the desired shape and textured it with our trusty foil ball. Then, using a hot glue gun, I attached the steps in place. After a couple of minutes, the Hobbit holes were ready to be primed. Alright, the Hobbit hole is fully built and primed, and now it's time to bring it to life with some paint. I will be layering earthy greens, warm browns and a little pops of color to make it feel like a cozy home straight out of the Shire. And hey, if you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me grow and keeps the crafting magic alive. I also want to invite you to my Discord server where you can share your creations, ideas and suggestions. Link in the video description. Now let's grab our brushes and make this Hobbit hole shine. We will start by priming everything with a mix of black acrylic paint and PVA glue. For those new to the channel, adding glue to the mix helps harden the foam, making the piece more durable. I usually apply a couple of coats to ensure full coverage. Once dry, we will paint the facade walls with fawn as our base color, which we will lighten a bit later using the dry brush technique. Next, we will paint the mount. For this step, I'm using an old brush, and we will wet blend two colors onto the piece, dark brown and a green. This will create gradients and a nice color variation, which will serve as a base for the static grass. Now, we will do a dry brush of buttermilk across the wall we painted earlier. Don't worry too much if you get a little paint on a beam, since we will paint those brown later. Use a small brush and just a bit of paint for this step. Next, we will do an overbrush with dark red on the chimney to simulate bricks. Red doesn't cover very well, so you will need to apply a bit more than usual, but that's fine since we want the black base to remain slightly visible. We will also apply an overbrush with neutral grey on the stone steps I added to one of the houses. Now let's move on to the wood. We will start with an overbrush using a medium brown. I've shown you how to achieve these effects in the video on painting terrain, so I will link it here in case you want a deeper dive. Make the strokes perpendicular to the wood grain to ensure the paint settles in the right areas, leaving the deeper parts unpainted. We will paint the door frames next, using neutral grey again. Here it's better to use a small brush to avoid smudging the wall. Once it dries, we will use the same techniques I used for the stonework on the city tiles, painting individual stones in various tones. I will also link the city tiles video here for anyone interested. It's one of my favorite projects to date. We will paint the metallic parts of the door with a mix of gunmetal and orange. In a bit we will finish with some silver highlights, but for now let's keep painting while those areas dry. I also applied a very light pure white dry brush to the stone, to highlight the edges and add depth to the steps texture. Returning to the wood, we will use a lighter tone this time, applying dry brushing only to certain areas. Focus on edges and textured spots. Take your time and carefully decide which areas to highlight. Don't overdo it, as we want both the black base coat and the two shades of brown to remain visible. We will also apply another overbrush of red to the chimney to add depth. Then we will dry brush some silver on the hinges and the doorknob to make them pop. Finally, we will lightly dry brush grey on the chimney. This will give it a worn look and reduce the saturation of the red color. And with that, the paint job is done. Now comes one of the most fun parts of this kind of projects, adding vegetation. Painting done! And it's looking fantastic! Next up is flocking, where we will add grass, moss and other details to give it that lush Hobbiton feel. Before we get started, a quick reminder, if you're loving the content, consider checking out my Patreon. There you will find exclusive templates, behind the scenes content and much more. Also in the video description you will find a link to my Amazon material list. If you purchase something from there, I will earn a small commission at no extra cost for you. That being said, let's make this build feel alive with some greenery. There's very little left to finish our Hobbit holes. First, use a disposable container and mix sponge foliage in various shades with PVA glue. I eyeball the quantities, but the idea is to achieve a dense paste-like consistency that can be spread easily. I started using a brush to avoid getting my hands messy, but it was too complicated, so I decided to apply the mixture directly with my fingers. Apply the foliage in patches, taking the opportunity to cover gaps or small imperfections, like the chimney openings or the joints between the roof and the mount. Press the mixture firmly to ensure no small pieces stick out that could fall off later. Once you're happy with the result, let it dry for at least a couple of hours, or until the glue turns transparent before moving on. Now that the moss patches have solidified, it's time for the static grass. Apply PVA glue to the bare areas and use an old brush to spread the glue. Try to fill all the gaps without foliage, so that the mound is completely covered. For this step, use a static grass applicator if you have one. If not, you can use a metal sieve to sprinkle the grass. Do it slowly until the entire surface is covered, leaving no white spots visible. When finished, place the house on a non-stick surface like parchment paper or silicone, and let it dry overnight. After drying, though I don't show this in the video, you should turn the house upside down so any loose grass falls off. Tap the base gently to dislodge any remaining loose grass. Don't forget to save all the excess static grass for future projects. Alright, I've gathered all the flowers and tufts I have, because now we are at the final stage of the project. Start by gluing the largest flowers using super glue and hobby tweezers. I'm using 3 of my available colors for this, aiming for a colorful look while keeping some cohesion. I placed 2 of each in spots I thought worked well. You can arrange them randomly or use them to cover areas where the grass didn't stick well, hiding any remaining imperfections. Next, we will glue smaller lilac flowers, scattering them here and there before moving on to the tufts. The process for the tufts is exactly the same. Seb uses many more flowers in his videos than I have today. I encourage you to do whatever works best for you depending on the type of setting you want for your games. In my case, I aim for a darker scenery style. While this Hobbit Hole is a bit outside my usual work, there will probably be a crook story behind it when it appears in my games. So I didn't want it to look overly cheerful despite its colorful appearance. There are no absolutes in this hobby, so again, experiment and try things until you find your style. With these final flowers, the project is complete. Let's set up a small board with the 3 houses we made, add some scatter and take some cool photos. And there you have it! Our cozy Hobbit Hole is now complete. This piece is perfect for adding a touch of Middle-earth to your games or just for displaying as a tribute to Tolkien's world. Now that it's finished, I realize it needs some windows. I always forget this kind of things when I craft without planning. But I don't care that much. Lesson learned for the next build. I hope. If you want to explore even more, check out my itch.io page, where I have loaded free adventures and hand-drawn maps to inspire you for your next campaign. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments if you ever build something inspired by the Lord of the Rings. Until next time, stay creative, keep crafting, and see you in the next one!